Hello, everyone. We're back, or I'm back.
Yes. So, so when you're living in certain communities, you tend to pay attention to the environment. You immediately know, and you can sense if it's a healthy one or one that you have to survive in based off of the product of the environment. And immediately, when you're younger, you can't see the bigger picture. So you're growing up in these neighborhoods and environments, and that kind of molds your character and who you are as long as you're a part of that environment, whatever it may be. And so the older generation who is above the younger one make those decisions based off of a lot of factors: economic, abilities, and we could just leave it at that, because obviously everyone wants the best environment, the house on the beach or whatever, right? Naturally, you're going to want the best location to live in. So you have a lot of people in different parts of the world. In particular, we're talking about the United States. And if you go from different state to state, there's different levels of progression in the local economics and the way that city, town, or state may develop. And for the most part, that is the bigger picture to the smaller community. Because if you go to, let's say, a state like Idaho, for that matter, you're probably going to have a lower population and not too many people visiting. And then you're going to have a basic local tradition of how those particular cities or towns thrive or live. And it may be minimum to, if you go to like a city in New York and you go to New York City, which has a big old metropolitan population and resources. So when you compare the two, this sets the stage for what we would call the environment in which you grow in, live in. So there's different levels throughout the United States, and people grow up in different fashions of these areas. Now, for the most part, when you become when you have the ability to change the condition in which you're in for the better, then you do so. So we tend to find ourselves attaching ourselves to ways to do that, whether it's through a career, business, employment, whatever, inherited wealth, resources that we may use to reach the common goal of a better environment. So at this point, and you look at the overall aspect of the whole community, then you tend to be categorized with that community, and no one is immune to it or can get around it. It's just a natural thing. For an example, when you have let's say Africa, for that matter, you have a large natural wildlife habitat there, and based off of the location and the environment, the animals that live in that environment will be conditioned to that habitat. And so that's what I'm kind of like saying here when we live in the communities we live in. So with that being said, I have here with me once again,
Like I said, I'm back.
yes, Rebecca. In a minute, we can call her Doctor in a minute. So that'll be good. But for the most part, let's get right into it.
I don't have to have titles, but
yes.
But doctor just sounds cool.
So for an example, let's say you grew up in you moved around a little bit. We all have, but let's say you grew up in a suburb area, and you knew that how that environment was, right? If it was up to you, would have moved as a child, or would have stayed there?
Oh, well, growing up, it was suburban. And no, I couldn't have made those decisions. But, my parents, I don't think they would have gone back to urban for raising up small children. So, suburban areas are best for raising, families and stuff. But when we're talking about gentrification or how do you say that? Gentrification. The first thing that we had looked at was that it's changing. So it's changing something. That's what that means. When people talk about gentrification, they're talking about changing something. That's first thing we saw. So people, listeners should know and understand that, when you're speaking about gentrification, the first thing that comes to mind is, what is it that you're changing? Or what effects is it having that's making what change? And if the response or answer is you're changing it, or it's changing these urban areas or suburban areas for something that is good, or is it changing it for something that is bad? And so really, that's the first thing I saw just right off the bat. And then from there, we have the next piece of it that we have to break down as far as the whole concept of gentrification.
Yes. The pros and cons to gentrification, right? So if you ask me, I would say that it's an old occurrence, but a new usage strategy, because gentrification has been occurring naturally. It naturally happens. It has nothing to do with anything but what naturally happens. But let's look at it from a political standpoint, because it mentioned it is a controversial thing, and how it's being used today is to create a change. So at this point, what's happening? Okay, let's just define gentrification in today's term. Okay, you have a changing of the characteristics or the character of a neighborhood in large amounts, right? To residents and businesses, right? And it is very controversial in urban politics. And the reason why is because those who are currently in these locations are being moved around. So as we talked about in our other video, reparations, I mentioned a key point in there, and that was like the economic gap that is in between the ability of brown and black people as opposed to Caucasian / Anglo. And so when you look at the gap that's in between, here we go again. This is another reason why the gap is important, because that gap is the leading motivation for gentrification, because the gap has created a wealth for these individuals, and then they're using this wealth to create the gentrification. So what do I mean by that? Let's break it down. Okay. The gentrification progress or process is typically the result of increasing attraction to an area by people with higher incomes, spilling over from neighboring cities, towns, and neighborhoods. Further steps are increased investments in a community and the related infrastructure by real estate development, business, local government, and community activists, and resulting economic development, increased attraction of business, and lower crime rates. So this is the purpose for this. But if you pay attention to the first part, it is generated by people with higher incomes. So, in addition to these potential benefits, gentrification can lead to population migration. This is the effects of this process. So we all heard about migration. In some instances, it happened in different occurrences. And that's why I said that gentrification has always been around naturally, but it's being used differently with high earning income people. So if you tie the two together, this is why the gap needs to be closed, because you having these class of individuals with higher incomes motivating this gentrification, which causing a migration of, we would say, the populations that are currently residing in these areas. And this is why, when you put it all together, why you still have the gap increasing and not decreasing. And this is why we are calling for reparations for Black and brown Americans in the United States, so we can close that gap. Okay. Because this is occurring in large amounts throughout the United States, which is causing a flux of people that are left either homeless, either in jail, or either just out there and about as waste. And these are the effects of it. Now,
right off the bat, when you see these pictures, so like migration, like that process, when I hear that, I think, well, gentrification is good, because migration is a good thing, because, populations, whether poor or wealthy, would need to have the ability to migrate from environment to environment if the need so arises to do so. So, really, if that is one of the effects, that just to look at what the effects of it, to me, looking at the overall, whether this is causing something good or causing some good changes or bad changes, and because it mentioned when you look it up, people classify or define it as a character being changed, and so that's the focus. But what character are you talking about, and what effects are you talking about? So, but migration as an effect would be a positive. That would be one of the positive things, because all populations at some point is going to need the ability to change their environment, meaning like go from one environment to the other, where things may be improved in another area, or resources are available in another area. And so migration is a positive effect on populations and on people in general. So I would have to say that would be a positive effect.
Okay. And
But
so,
if that's the only change that's occurring, then yeah. But if that's not, then what else is going on?
okay, so this is also what's going on, and this is where the controversy comes in. Okay, because in extreme cases, gentrification can be bought on by a term called prosperity bomb. Okay, and however, some view the fear of displacement, and that is the part where the controversy comes in. The fear of displacement, because there's a lot of people being displaced. Now here's the thing, I like to call this,
Displacement sounds negative,
yes,
in itself.
yes,
And
and
I
that's
don't
what's
like
happening.
that term,
Uh-huh.
as a matter of fact. But, displacement, and you said fear. So you kind of
Yes.
went
The fear
right
of
to it.
displacement.
But, yeah, and fear is not good to be spread among populations. So go ahead with that, because that would
Yes.
be the negative.
Yes.
Okay.
And so that's the effect of the actual gentrification. On one hand, it may be pleasing to the high earning income to create this metropolis place, but all the people who are there having the fear of being displaced, which is coming, and it does come. And so I like to call that, right, a natural, permanent, natural disaster. That is a natural disaster, because what happens when a tornado tears up a community? What happens when a hurricane comes and wipe away a community? What happens when an earthquake comes and destroys a community? It's the fear of displacement that is being coined or captured during these natural disasters. And we all know, if you ever experienced any of those natural disasters, we know what that feels like, right? And people go through it, and it creates anxiety, panic, chaos, turmoil, crimes increase. There's a lot of, and that's why I mentioned earlier, when you have this group, large amounts of displacement, what do you have? You have those things occurring, chaos, crime, all these things. We seen it best with Hurricane Katrina. There was millions of people from New Orleans was displaced, and they had fear, and it spilled over into other cities. And what happened? The crime rate increased. A lot of people lost their lives. So on and so forth. This is what's happening by the drive of gentrification. So we always remember, when there's something occurring, those who are so caught up in survival mode never could see past what the effects cause. They just know that it's an effect, and that they sense that it's wrong, but they're never heard when they're speaking out against it. So that's what's the controversy right now.
And it's, I was just my thought was, when the way you described that you could just sum it up with, migration, if it's a good thing, and it is, then of populations, then there obviously can be such a thing as successful migration, and then unsuccessful migration would be the displacement aspect, where they feel fear, and then there's disorder and chaos among their people and others as well. So it almost seems to where the controversy just is simply a matter of being successful versus those that have a fear and are unsuccessful at the migration. because there needs to be, for successful migration to occur, there does need to be an element or a foundation that provides for those business, whether it be their business, whether it be their family, whether it be their community, to sort of take root. And I'm kind of really making a big picture here with that, but those things to be solidified in within that population who is migrating, that population that's migrating, and that would be the difference between, populations that and even individuals within those populations that successfully migrate from those that do not, is those that have and have found the solid foundation within their community that they're migrating to, or their family that they're migrating from one area, suburban area, into an urban area, or business that they're migrating from and to. So that would be mainly the controversy, rather than it necessarily meaning that there's actual spreading of this one warring against that one, although that would be a topic that would be in this whole gentrification that would come up. What about war? Does that displace, when you got tribes or peoples that war against each other because of gentrification or territory or migration,
so
going in and out, and businesses going in and out, and families and communities. So
here's a couple examples of something that we know in the history of gentrification, because it's been around. It's a Europe term, gentry, and the Romans used it, the French used it, the British used it. So it's a European term. And so let's look at a little bit of history. Do you recall the Trail of Tears here in America? That was a form of gentrification, where the natives had to leave their land and go to some place in which they were forced to do so. And a lot of them died along the way, so on and so forth. But so we could say that there is a lot of negativity that comes with that process. And yes, there's the people who are being migrated or migrating two ways, those who's coming in and those who are leaving out. And the ones who are leaving out tend to have the fear of displacement, because where are they going? Was it planned? Did they have enough time? Almost like being foreclosed on a home. All this creates instability. So it automatically leads to other problems in society. It's like waste. You create these products and then you get rid of them if you don't discard them properly. And we're not talking about people, right? But when you look at it, it pollutes the atmosphere. Let's say gases, right? You put it in your vehicle and then it causes greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which pollutes the air. It has to go somewhere, right? And so, yes, and this is how you have a domino effect on how we believe that we solve one problem, and then another one is created.
There is such a thing as the solidifying of that migration, because you're going to have, basically, you said not people, but yeah, you're going to have human wastes, as in
Yes.
overpopulation too, because you could, if the migration is unsuccessful in the sense that there is no solidifying with they're migrating from one area urbanly to suburbanly, or even other areas, because there's urban, there's suburban, and rural. So you can migrate to those three environments, speaking from how you describe population living. And so you could you could look at it as whether they're successful or not in their migration. And so
so here's the thing. You have a
so
group.
if they don't, like you said, if they don't have somewhere they know, or something they know, they're just being migrated like they're just going along with it type of thing, then yeah.
So,
and that's where the problems, also disorder and stuff. So there needs to be not only migration, there needs to be leadership.
yes.
So leadership in the sense of, someone
to combat.
and being accountable and responsible, for that migration,
So,
And if you look at how natural migration occurs, it's all built in. So it's all successful. But if you try to go against that built-in nature to migrate successfully, then you can have all those problems. So there needs to be not only obviously leadership, but the ones who are underneath that care have to also be willing and able to be under that leadership, and willing and under that. So it's both the people that are along with it and the leadership, which kind of makes you think political, because you think of the word leadership.
yes. And here's the other things, the other nuances that's involved with the process. We talked about the migration part, but picture this, right? You are in a cultural environment and you have no idea that there's been plans for your community to become something else, right? You're not involved in the process. You just living today to day, what you've been living like, and all of a sudden here comes these notifications of we are creating, I don't know the exact process, because I haven't been approached with any offers to sell any property or forced sale of any properties, because there's going to be a new project in town. It's almost like when you're clearing off a natural habitat. Is the live is the life that is in the habitat protected, right? And when they ready to develop there, what do? They just wipe off, clear the land, and start building. So it's kind of like that process. So there's planning way beforehand, and then here comes these notifications saying, hey, we're going to be building these new projects. We want to make an offer for this property. You have this much time to make a decision. If not, then, whatever, right? And so you create this fear and this panic. What? Like, they're doing this to this whole area, then they send you zones and maps on what's going to be there and so on and so forth. So now you're like, wait,
exactly. And don't they already do that? Like, don't communities already have like a structure to them? And so then you add on top of that migration,
you break all
people
that.
coming and going, and not necessarily whether they're stable, because then you have that aspect. You don't know if you're one of the ones in the community and you're just living, and then you have also like what I was saying, you have to have a leadership and those willing to be under that leadership, that may not be in the leadership, they just know of the leadership. And then they
speak out,
have to migrate. And then what are they going to do when they get to these communities that already have a structure?
Exactly. And so you're kind of getting rid of that culture, and there's panic because there's like, what? This is what's happening? What? I didn't know about this. Well, you probably should have been more involved, right? Going down to the city hall when they having these meetings and, making these decisions about the community when you are the community, or you guys are the community. Mm-hmm. And then you don't know. And then now you're like, okay, I'm being offered to sell my property for this amount of money and get, and go, when really it's like, okay, but I didn't plan for that.
Well, that's like you said. So there's some, and you never know what there's different, peoples within those are, made up of different situations. And, there may be good reason for them to not necessarily fear, but to be
displaced,
more wanting to root themselves in that community, and they don't know necessarily what is going on, too much involvement in it. They just know they're in it, type of thing, and that they maybe need this or that, and that's about it. And as long as they have their needs met, they don't go beyond their knowledge on that, and so they just don't. But that would say, I probably would guess that would be a smaller percentage of any given population, meaning it's like phased. Like they may be going through their situation that would be like a phase, because you got to look at it as there's going to be families and, small children, and stuff like that. So when you look at communities, you're not necessarily just thinking about their leadership and just thinking about their community, because as a matter of fact, families make up the community. And so you do have to think about like what they're made up of and what their situation is. And, so mostly, but even then, even so, you still have to address those problems in any community. If the structure of a community needs restructuring,
yes,
or totally, so like I got that feeling too. Like there's times when things do need to be changed, and those changes need to make positive
outcomes,
for
everyone involved.
And,
so let's look at it like this. Then we see it in the larger urban cities. So the metropolitan areas. We know it's happening in LA, Houston, and probably other places. And who's residing in these places? Well, it's mainly the people at the lower end of the gap, the brown and the black communities, and the conditions they live in is not so pleasing. And those are the ones of choice, or locations of choice, that are being gentrified. Now, why? Because they are in good locations, and they tend to have some of the better locations in the metropolitan areas. It's just that the actual structure of the communities are either out of date, worn down, and when you look at it, how could you make this city look and feel better? The only way to do that not the only way, this is the way of choice it was done, gentrification. there's another way that we could go about this. And this is when you look at the reasons for it, right? We look at, to improve the community, right? Overall, the way it looks, structure, up to date, make it modern to fit with the background and the backdrop. Yes. But what's happening in the process? You have the high earners getting that land. Now, if they were simply revamping the location and returning it back to the community, then it wouldn't be no problem.
Well, actually, the high earners, what you call high earners, what I'm assuming you're viewing as high earners, you mean like the wealthy, like the moneymaker?
Higher income.
So
who's going to be
the higher
living?
income brackets actually aren't acquiring the land, and that's the problem with their structure. So what's happening from what I've seen in the United States is that the high earners are being almost, I don't want to say forced, because I mean, they've got money, but it's ending up to where they're not owning the land, they're owning other things. And so it's all about that structure. And even they are disappointed because they thought their money was going to do more than maybe they thought their money was going to do more. And if you speak to them, they tell you that, I don't own the land. I own these structures. I own these houses, but I don't own the land.
Obviously.
And there's a landlord, as a matter of fact, that comes to me, yet I own this house. So that's happening all over the United States with these high earners. And that is a structural problem, you see? So
I did
how
see.
would you approach?
I did see. I was going to ask, are you saying that there was like some resistance there, even though they revamped the community? You have the people still ain't going nowhere.
I mean, for example,
they're like hanging outside the
we
buildings.
owned, or you owned,
Uh-huh.
A house in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And, supposedly, and this goes back to our previous, for listeners, this goes back to our topic of 40 acres and a mule, which sounds funny, but at the same time, this is all connecting because, and serious because, these are real everyday problems that people in the United States are faced with. So if you're a home buyer for the first time, this is important, as well as if you are a homeowner. So in the United States, the trend, at least, has been that you purchase your house, you're a first time house buyer, and so you get your house and everything, and you get your mortgage and stuff. But it's, I'm kind of simplifying everything, but do you own the land around your house? And then you got the zoning. So I mean, it's a structural thing for all communities in the United States. And why is that? Oh, just the bigger picture that you spoke on earlier, and that was, these negative effects come into play, and you got higher crime rates that come in. You got, when these things are occurring, you got chaos, disorder in general, and so people automatically put up borders, and it's no different on the community level, and they put up these fences, literally. But what if we lived in all of the United States with communities that didn't put up so much of these visible too. There's the invisible borders, and then there's the visible borders, and that's what I'm talking about, because like it's very clear when you have fences that border off your property from the neighbor's property. So I'm just saying that is a clear indication that you don't own much of the land. You may own that mini little backyard, and even then they still come and tell you what you can do with it. So when you owned that house, you owned the house. You didn't own the land.
No. So with that being said, that you mentioned that there is two ways about going about this thing. And there is a transition from the old way into the new way of living. So back then, and you still have these people that own the land first and then build on top, and they just pay taxes on the land. But could we really say they own that land? They're just able to do whatever on it and then pass it down to their relatives. But the newer way, you see the big business community developers purchasing large amounts of the land, as the individual would have done a long time ago for a smaller amount. These businesses are purchasing large amounts of land, and they own it and keep the rights to it. And then they have the community come in and, you could say, rent a space or a lot within that structure, which they still charge you for that lot overall. So you can build a structure on top. But at the end of the day, you're just renting that lot, and they literally have the royalties to the land, meaning you're building on their land. They never relinquish that property. That land. They just allowing you to build on that lot. And they'll charge you, like, depending on how large the lot, the square footage, they'll charge you for that space. But in the fine print, they still own the rights to the land, the developer.
Exactly. So, and then you've got other players that come in when you're talking about the land. So, I mean, I remember all of these things when you did purchase that house, and that's all across the United States. But something from an earlier podcast too was we have so much land.
Yes.
And it would literally change the way people live and the way communities are built or not built.
Exactly.
So, I mean, and land is a resource, right? Just like humans are, a resource. So if it changes the way, if this whole gentrification and migration changes the way that people build or not build their community, then that could be, looked at as like a good thing, because either way, whether they build or don't, there's going to be some changes, and they'll be forced in a sense. I want to say forced, but that sounds kind of harsh. But, they're not forced. People are not forced, but I mean, everybody has a choice. But that's the point, is there'll be more choice for all people. And so not only are the leaders faced with choices, but people are faced with choices. And when you open up the conversation about, there's available land for everyone, that can change the way they live. Yes. If they so choose.
Yes. And these are some things to think about when developing a city, state, country. There's better ways to do this. It doesn't have to be done the same way it always have been. There's a lot of bright individuals with ideas that can improve the way this structuring of how things been to improve everybody's quality of life, not just for one group of people, but everyone can have the space and the resources they need to thrive and have a positive outlook on the overall aspect of growing and living together. So
Yeah, and I mean, from what I hear from my experience, everybody is happy with choices. But take away that's when they get, panicky, or so give those individuals the knowledge with what choices they have, and provide choices to them. Then not only will you see these the effects being positive, but you'll see a bigger picture of, well, we're not only making positive changes in our community or for communities, but we're also creating when you think about it, creating and helping them to create a new way of living. And
yes.
That to me is worth it, because that's really what it's about. It's not really about, letting anything else get in the way of a better, striving for happiness and through a better way of living.
Yes.
For the individual. And then that can go into, because you're reaching the individual at that point. But when you've got those kinds of changes, then I feel that you could have overall gentrification or migration success.
Yes. Well,
I know we could talk a lot.
So I hope you guys enjoyed our discussion here with Global News Podcast on gentrification and the effects that one way or the other it has on the culture, the community, and it's occurring right here in the United States. And maybe some of this can be food for thought to see how to approach it from both sides and what could be done to have a favorable outcome for everyone involved. Until next time, here with Rebecca here, I am Eric, your host, and we'll see you again next time on the next edition of Global News Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, and have a great day.